Hello everyone, welcome to this evening's webinar. We're just waiting on a few people to join. We are running a few moments late, so apologies for that, to keep you waiting. But we will get started very, very shortly. Just a little bit of housekeeping whilst we're waiting. If you would like to keep your camera on, please do. It's lovely to see your faces and interact with you all. We are recording this session, but any faces will be blurred out, so please don't worry about that. We will be doing a Q&A at the end of the session, so any questions throughout the presentation, just put them in the chat box and then we can go through as many as we can. I think we will have quite a bit of time for questions today, so do ask away, and then we can go through them all at the end. You will get sent a recording of the webinar as well. So if you want to replay any sort of key bits, if you forget in a few days' time, then you always have the option there just to go back and have a look at what was said. So we'll just wait on a few more people to join and then we can get started. Hi everyone. Okay, let's give it 30 more seconds and then we can add people as we are going along. Okay, we shall get started. So, like I said, welcome everyone to this evening's webinar. Thank you for spending the next hour with myself. So my name is Emma Patch. I am a registered nutritionist and I'm a team leader at Coombe Grove. And this particular webinar will be looking at your metabolic health and how to transform your well-being. So you might be thinking, what does it mean to be metabolically healthy? What are you referring to, Emma? So I'm going to do a quick summary about what we're going to cover in today's webinar. So what it means in terms of metabolic health, why it's important to you, why, it could be really significant for you. What is the core root of metabolic health? So how do we actually look at these issues that we may be experiencing and implement those, strategies to help us along the way? How to use our 5 roots to help you live well, live better for longer. So if you don't know already, at Coombe Grove, we always talk about your 5 roots for metabolic health. So you can see here on the screen, there's a lovely tree drawing, and you've got those 5 roots coming out of the tree. So you've got nutrition, which we say is the core fundamental root, along with movement, mindset, sleep, environment. And then I'll give you some sort of top tips on each of those 5 roots of things to focus on, things you can start to implement in sort of your everyday lives. And then, like I said earlier, we will be doing a Q&A. So make sure you put questions in the chat box as we're going along, and we'll get through as many as we can at the end of the session, which I think we'll have time for today. So please do make sure you keep on asking away. So, what is metabolic health? So you probably have heard of the word metabolism before. I think we all have. And it's a little bit of a myth that your metabolism only refers to your weight, because actually it refers to our whole energy system and how our body is operating. So if you think about sort of your mood, your overall energy, along with your weight, that's all relating back to that one thing in the body, which is your metabolic health. So it's the foundation of both our physical and mental health. I always love the saying that we have a neck which connects our body and our heads, our mind, our brain, because sometimes we view them as separate entities, but actually it's our whole body which we're affecting by looking at our metabolic health. So it describes our ability to store, release, and how we are using that fuel to maintain that balance in the body, so that homeostasis, which is really, really important. So we'll go into that in more detail going forwards. But essentially, when it goes out of balance, that's when we see this dysregulation happen and all these symptoms and lifestyle diseases develop. And we define metabolic health when all our 9 metabolic health markers, or key markers, are in a normal, healthy range without medication and any sort of input, essentially, from a clinical perspective. So it's operating functionally all by itself. So the markers that we're looking at for your metabolic health, obviously you do have sort of physical and mental signs as well, but these are the ones that we measure at Coombe Grove, and ones that you can pay attention to as well. So if you have any recent sort of blood tests, if you've got any recent sort of GP checkups, these are the things that you should pay a little bit more attention to, just to keep an eye on and see where they are currently. So your waist to height ratio, so it's a little bit more of an accurate measurement than your BMI. Blood pressure is quite a common one that you usually get when visiting your GP. Your weight, so particularly sort of your fat mass we're looking at, and then we can break that down into visceral fat as well. In terms of, if anyone doesn't know what visceral fat is, it's the fat that, instead of the fat you can pinch on your skin, is the fat that tends to be around your organs. So it's actually, you can't see it. And it just tends to be slightly more active in the body. So again, just one we want to keep an eye on and be aware of. Muscle mass, so just the amount of muscle that we have. Strength and fitness going alongside that. Your HbA1c, so that's your average of blood glucose in the last 3 months, sorry. So it's the most accurate measure that you can get. Your triglycerides and your triglyceride HDL ratio. So those 2 key markers are really looking at your cholesterol quality. So instead of that total cholesterol figure that you might, have got from the GP, we're actually breaking that down a little bit of a step further and looking at that quality. So what is actually going on within that cholesterol? So are they, nice big fluffy molecules, which we want to have in the body, that transport our sex hormones, our fat soluble vitamins, instead of these small particles which potentially can do a little bit more damage? And which I say is one of the most important things, and probably something that we don't think about when we're making lifestyle changes, is our quality of life score, because it's about the years that we live, and the quality of them makes a humongous difference to our overall life and well-being. So why is metabolic health important to you, or why could it be important to you? So if you've got quite bad fatigue, or even just after a meal, you feel quite tired, you have aches and pains, you suffer with brain fog, you suffer with mental clarity, your mood is a little bit unstable throughout the day, so you can experience mood swings or agitation quite easily. Anything to do with your gut as well, so acid reflux, for example, even sort of constipation. It's all actually coming to a sign. It's a sign that your body's telling you something's not quite right. It is a little bit out of balance, and actually you might have some metabolic dysfunction there. So those are just a few sort of key signs that you can look out for in yourself, and ask yourself, if you're experiencing any of those things, what can you do about it to help you? Because we want to make our lives as easy as we possibly can. We will always have external stressors, so it's about how we are managing those. And if our body is really tired, if it's maxed out just doing the basics, often we find those external stressors a lot harder to deal with. So we want to become more resilient, and that's the lovely way of thinking about your metabolic health, is how your body is interacting with your external environment. And what depends on that is how we use it and what we do every day. So you might be thinking, oh, Emma, this might affect a small amount of people, but actually the data is showing us it affects the vast majority. So about 12% of American adults are considered metabolically healthy. So meaning all those things are in range without sort of medication, and that they feel well and can function optimally. So that means 88% of adults are currently showing signs of metabolic dysfunction. And data from the UK is showing a very, very similar trend. So it might not be as bad at the moment, but it certainly is getting there. And that's kind of what we've seen historically in terms of data. Tends to be, America comes out first and then the other Western countries follow suit shortly after. So we're looking at the root cause. So how can we turn this around? What can we target in the body? And it's really important, I think, to understand what is happening or what should happen in our bodies. And the root cause of a lot of metabolic dysfunction does tend to be when our hormones, particularly our insulin, is out of balance. So it's often quite high. So I'm just going to take you through sort of what usually should happen in an insulin sensitive person, so a metabolically healthy person. So we've put carbohydrates there as step one in terms of their eaten, because fat and protein, if you looked at that on a graph, and the effect of insulin is very, very minimal. There's hardly anything that increases, whereas carbohydrates have quite a direct impact on insulin. So it's quite a rapid increase that you will experience depending on how many carbohydrates that you have and the quality of that and what you have with them. So carbohydrates foods are eaten, and this usually spikes our blood glucose. And our bodies are not designed to have high levels of glucose in the bloodstream. So we're only supposed to have about a teaspoon of glucose at all times. So our insulin, our hormone, which is produced by the pancreas, will then come along and knock on the doors of a cell and ask it to take in that glucose from the bloodstream, because it doesn't want those levels to be high, because that's causing inflammation. And in an insulin sensitive person, a metabolic friendly person, the cell obliges. So it says, okay, yes, absolutely, I'll take that in and I'll convert it into energy and use it for everything that I need to do, all those chemical reactions which happen in the body, which we're not aware of. Then obviously because that cell has taken in that glucose, your blood glucose levels will then fall and go back to a normal level. However, over time, when this keeps on happening, so this happened repeatedly, day in, day out, week after week, month after month, years after years, our body gradually becomes less sensitive to insulin. So our blood glucose levels will rise in the same way. But when insulin is released by the pancreas and is trying to knock on those cells, the cells are not very responsive this time. So actually then the pancreas needs to work harder and release even more insulin, because those blood glucose levels are still high. And remember, that's not all we want in the body. That's causing inflammation. That's not what is designed to happen. So more and more insulin is released, causing those cells to open. And then that blood glucose level will fall eventually, but your body has to work significantly harder to get to the same place. So not exactly what we want. And then as that continues to happen, insulin resistance will become higher and higher until it gets to the point where it's actually unable to regulate those blood glucose levels anymore. So they actually stay permanently high. So causing that inflammation, damaging sort of your protein, damaging your protein molecule, damaging your DNA, things like that. Not what we want to happen. And that's where you see sort of that pre-diabetes, that type 2 diabetes diagnosis. That's what's happened in the lead up to that. And the body is constantly fighting to try and bring those blood sugars levels down. So that state of imbalance is actually what's causing those really day-to-day stressors. So that fatigue, that foggy headedness, the reduction of mental clarity, the gut issues, and then anything that you see in terms of your high blood pressure, in terms of high blood glucose, high fat mass, and your triglycerides and your HDL ratio is all relating back to that central thing in the body, which is your metabolic health and insulin resistance. So just to clarify, kind of what insulin resistance actually looks like, because I think sometimes we just associate it with type 2 diabetes or high blood pressure, but actually, like I said, is that root cause in the body. So it's that thing that's underpinning a whole host of lifestyle diseases because it's causing that inflammation essentially. So you'll be able to see the tree on the right hand side of the screen here, with lots and lots of different conditions, all relating back to that root cause. So things like, heart disease, for example, arthritis, so very commonly seen when you have chronic inflammation. Dementia, so like I said at the start of the webinar, we have our neck, so anything going on in our body is going to affect our brain, which is why we see that reduction in mental clarity. Increased fat mass, fatty liver, gout, even migraines have been associated with insulin resistance, and high carbohydrate diets actually just causing that roller coaster in the body. Sarcopenia as well, and that's obviously related to your muscle mass, and even things like PCOS, which is becoming quite common. So if you don't have any of these conditions or lifestyle related conditions, then actually it's important to note that it is really gradual, and you can actually target your metabolic health before you get to that point. So if you are experiencing, low energy levels, imbalanced mood, extreme hunger or craving, so particularly after you've eaten about 2 hours, if your blood glucose drops significantly, it's actually in that drop that you experience that agitation, that hunger feeling, and that uncomfortableness where your body's just screaming at you for energy. Whereas when it's actually not going on that roller coaster, so it's not going up and down, it's a lot more stable. So that results in us feeling a lot more stable as well. Aches and pains, lingering menopause symptoms is another really, really common one, highly related to metabolic health. Like I said, weight gain and any gut issues as well, particularly acid reflux. So I've just put in this slide because I just want to really sort of lay out how silently this can actually happen. So it takes probably about 10 to 15 years from going to, slightly at risk of insulin resistance to pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes. So it is very, very gradual. And actually, no matter where you are on this scale, so you could be at risk, there's always sort of those metabolic health markers that can be improved. So you can get to a place of optimal metabolic health, even if you are in good health or just at risk. So it's not for just those people experiencing that high blood glucose. But obviously, the sooner you make those changes, the less likely that is to happen. So that's just something to bear in mind. And, these things tend to happen. So insulin resistance tends to happen due to multiple factors. So things like increased amounts of ultra-processed food, causing that inflammation, causing that insulin to spike quite a bit, sedentary lifestyles, stress, and poor sleep. And that's why we say all these things are reversible by looking at our 5 roots for metabolic health. So nutrition, movement, sleep, environment, and mindset. And essentially our aim, our goal to help anyone that attends this webinar, anyone that comes to join us at Coombe Grove at any capacity, is to go from a sort of fight state where our body's, really struggling to just do the bare minimum, the day to day, and we're not feeling maybe our best self. So we are struggling, we maybe are more stressed because our body can't really handle those external stresses as well. Probably maybe your sleep is affected. You might actually move less because you feel like you don't have any energy, or you feel like you can't motivate yourself to do anything. And often that results in us blaming ourselves. So we blame it on sort of us not feeling motivated enough or driven enough, and we think we are sort of inadequate in a way, and that's not the case. It's just your body, struggling to get to that balanced place. So we want to go from that fight to balance. So more of those feelings that we want to have, and looking at your clinical markers, reducing any of those which are higher, and improving those in terms of your muscle mass and your cholesterol ratios, as well as your quality of life. So I'm just going to go through our 5 routes for metabolic health. So I've picked out just a few key points for each one. So if you do want to ask any more questions about a specific route, please do, and we can expand on that further. So nutrition, my top tips is prioritize protein at each meal. So we often underestimate the role protein can play. And when I say prioritize protein, I do mean from real whole foods. So it's become a little bit of a buzzword, I would say, recently. When you go to the supermarkets, you're often bombarded by, high protein products left, right, and centre. So it is important to note that we are focusing on real whole food. So we actually don't want to go for those ultra processed food options with those high protein marketing. We just want to go for, our fish or our meat or our beans and pulses, or some dairy in our diet. So it's just using our natural food sources in each meal. And I want you to ask yourself when you're having your meal, where is my protein coming from this meal? So just take note as a first step of what you're actually having, because it might be that you include some chicken, but it might be half a chicken breast. But actually, probably the best thing for your metabolic health and your overall energy is to have that whole chicken breast. So ask yourself, where is it coming from and how much am I having at meal times? And this also goes for snacks as well, because often I find clients maybe are having a piece of fruit, for example, or a cracker as a snack. And actually, when we look at the function of a snack, is to keep us going into our next meal. So we actually need to have a little bit of protein within that snack in order for that to fulfill the goal. Otherwise, we tend to get hungry quite quickly, and we will need another snack. Reducing, I'll go on to the next slide because that explains it a bit further. So this is our Eat Well guide. So for optimal metabolic health, this is kind of what you can envision for your plate going forward. So looking at, like I said, prioritizing that protein about 25%. So usually people maybe aim for about 15%. So you're just increasing it that tiny bit. Having lots of non-starchy vegetables, so lots of greens, lots of different colours, full of different nutrients, full of different minerals. Having small amounts of starchy carbohydrates, and that is just because it has the biggest impact on insulin. So we want to look at rebalancing our body, rebalancing our metabolic health. We just want to be mindful about how much we're having. So you can still include them, but it's just reducing that amount slightly makes a really, really big difference. And a top tip also is when you are having Any starchy carbohydrates such as sourdough, that's quite a common one for breakfast. Think about how you compare that with a bit of fat and a bit of protein just to help manage that blood glucose spike. It makes a really, really big difference. So if you can have, 3 eggs, let's say, on your sourdough, 3 scrambled eggs, instead of just some vegetables, then that will have a lot less of an impact in terms of inflammation in the body, rather than just having the sourdough by itself. So you've got a few different ideas there on the screen in terms of kind of the meals that you can aim for. So breakfast can be really, really simple. So using eggs, using cold meats, for example, and obviously pairing that with vegetables as well. So quite a nice one with spinach, for example, or mushrooms or tomatoes. Lunch, you can easily make up a quick salad or use leftovers from the night before. Or it can, again, just be something really simple. There's no reason why you couldn't have that sort of deli plate for lunch as well. Snacks, so nuts and seeds are a really, really great one. Dark chocolate is actually another one. You might be surprised to hear that, but if it's actually above 70% cacao solids, it's not actually that high in sugar, and it's got a decent amount of fats in it, so it actually keeps our blood sugar quite stable, and it fills us up for longer. It actually feels quite satisfying. And then dinner, something like a salmon, or you could use a different protein source, even some tempeh or tofu, with a Mediterranean vegetable tray bake. And then if you wanted something after that, just having a bit of Greek yogurt or berries, and you could have that earlier on in the day as well. Something that I forgot to mention is that we put fats in the middle of our plate, and that's just because we eat food, and usually our protein sources maybe has a little bit of fats in there. So if we're including some meats or some eggs or a bit of dairy, that usually carries a bit of fat. And even our non-starchy vegetables such as avocado can carry fats. So it's just something that is a combination. But I do recommend using fats to help make you feel full and satisfied, because it's often when we eat foods quite low in fat, or without that seasoning, without that olive oil dressing, that we don't really feel that satisfied, and we end up actually eating a lot more in the long run, snacking quite a lot, because we feel like we've missed out on that enjoyment element. So enjoying your food is super, super key for any sort of long-term changes when thinking about your metabolic health, because if you don't enjoy it, unfortunately, the likelihood of you sticking to it is quite slim. And like I said, it often leads to future snacking because you're not satisfied. Movement. So movement is another really, really key thing we can use to help us in terms of well-being and our metabolic health. So something that you might not have heard of before is activity snacks, which are just designed to be very small little increments that you can incorporate into your everyday routine. So it might be in the evening when maybe you are watching TV, maybe you are waiting for something to cook in the oven, that you can just incorporate a really small sort of 5-10 minute activity routine just to incorporate that little bit of movement. And then once you get used to that, you can then start to build on it. But it is important to focus on, how we can start small and then build it up over time, because that's what tends to work the best in terms of long-term habits. And I've put incorporate strength training just because muscle mass is really, really key when thinking about insulin resistance. So it's essentially our second insulin in the body, our muscles. So any glucose in your bloodstream, it will take it out instantly and just use it. It utilizes it very, very quickly. So any muscle that we can keep, any muscle that we can build is a significant advantage to our overall health. And if you're not used to strength training, it might sound like a really, really scary word, but you can just start with your body weight. you don't actually need to start with weight straight away. So you can do, for example, 20 squats or 20 lunges or 20 assisted push-ups. And that's using your body's big muscles. And the key is to get your muscles to fatigue. So get your muscles to a place where you feel like you can't do any more reps, or you can only do maybe one more. And then you want to build on that. So then you want to make it gradually harder each time, which you can actually do with things like resistance band or increasing the amount that you're doing. And you can do that with weights. And then if you keep on doing that week in, week out, that's how your muscle's actually going to grow. So sleep. Sleep is quite a big one in terms of when we aren't in that optimal place with our metabolic health. So my key tips are try to begin switching off before you actually get into bed. So sometimes we say, our bedtime or our ideal bedtime is around 10 p.m., let's say. So we go in to bed at 10 p.m. So you actually need to give your body that time to sort of switch off, your mind to sort of have that brain dumping activity. So anything like journaling, for example, reading before bed tends to help with that. So switching off your mind and taking it to that different place. And actually incorporating time restricted eating, which just means eating over a small amount of hours per day. So you're extending that fast that you have naturally overnight, can actually really help with sleep, because often when we're having food too close to going to bed, our body is actually still digesting that food. So it takes about 2 to 3 hours for our body to fully digest our food. So if it's doing that and then we want to, get it to switch off, get into a repair mode, it's not going to work as well, and it will affect your sleep quality. So incorporating time restricted eating is something that can really, really help actually with sleep as well as your overall metabolic health. So mindset, you could argue mindset is the most important because it underpins our actions, it underpins what we do. And I like to try and reframe my thoughts. So if there's any point where, you're struggling to do a certain action, or you think, something's quite hard. So it could be that you're going on a longer walk, or you could be that you're going for a jog the first time and, it's not something that feels comfortable if you're not used to doing it. So just telling yourself, oh, I can't believe I'm doing this is horrible, is maybe not the most helpful to help you do that activity. So reframing our thoughts in terms of, I get to do this, my body is allowing me to do this, I'm able to do this, and actually just showing a little bit of gratitude that our body's actually able to function this way, tends to really, really help. And in terms of mindset as well, another really, really key point is to focus on progress over perfection. So I don't know if anyone's heard of sort of that 1% rule before, but essentially we want to just focus on those small wins. So it could be that you have swapped your breakfast from cereal to eggs with your mushrooms and your spinach and your tomatoes. And if that's just one change you make in the day, that's so positive. That is an absolutely amazing achievement that you've managed to do that, because you've started your day off in the right way, and you probably will feel differently in the evening as if you had that than if you had your cereal. So it's focusing on that progress, not perfection, because often when we think, oh, I've got so many changes to make, I'm never ever going to get through all of these things, we just don't start. So starting is much, much better than focusing on what is the most ideal. So environment is the last one, and this comes in sort of two segments, if you like. It's, how we spend our time, where we spend our time, who we spend our time with. So are those people like-minded? Are you spending your time in a little bit of nature? Is your house really cluttered, or is it in a place where you feel relaxed? And is also, how can we set our environment up for success? So how can we make those habits that we want to do easier to do? So for example, if your intention is to wake up early and go to a gym class in the morning, for example, or even just a morning walk to get your light in first thing, you could set your clothes out the night before. So your shoes, your socks, everything that you need. So actually all you have to do is wake up, put on your clothes because they're there. It's very easy for you to do that task. Maybe brush your teeth or wash your face and then go for a walk or go to your gym class. So you're making that action a lot easier rather than waking up, not knowing where your gym trainers are, not knowing where your leggings are, not knowing where your jumper is. And before you know it, the time where you were going to do that exercise class or you were going to go for that walk has actually gone. So how can we use our environment to help us? And you can also use that in the other way. So things that we don't want to do, we can create a little bit more friction for. So for example, if you struggle with snacking on crisp, could you try to not have crisp in your household? Because then you've got quite a lot of friction there. So if you have that craving, you would then need to change out your pajamas, get in your car, drive to the shop, get the crisp, and then drive back home. So by that point, you're asking yourself, is it worth it? And do I actually want this enough in order to do that action? So you can use your environment to help you in multiple ways to create less friction and more friction for the things that we actually don't want to do and things that we want to stop doing. So just to summarize then, my top tips for the 5 roots is 1, nutrition, prioritizing protein. So particularly if you can get your breakfast right, it tends to set you up for the day going forward. Movement. So I didn't actually mention this, but if you can time your walks after your meal, it will really help manage your blood glucose and your insulin spikes. So anything that you can do after dinner, even if it's your sort of 20 squats whilst watching TV or just a 10-minute walk, will really help manage that in the body. Sleep, so incorporate time restricted eating. So just have a think about when is the last thing you consume every day. And this actually includes anything with milk or any alcohol as well. So it's just asking yourself that question, how long is my eating window from start to finish? Is it 12 hours? Is it 15 hours? A lot of people do actually have quite a long eating window where you incorporate things like milk and fizzy drinks and alcohol. Mindset, to look for those small wins of progress each day. So look at the things that you are doing or the things that you can incorporate, even if it's just a 10-minute walk, even if it's just changing your breakfast. Those are still significant impacts. And if you did that every single day, you would see results. And environment, I think the key here is just reframing your environment to try and install those habits that you want to happen. So create as less friction as you possibly can to have those habits that you want to have. And just a question I want you to think about going forward and ask yourself is, how could you improve your metabolic health, and what difference could this make to your daily life? So if you're someone that struggles with fatigue, if you're someone that really experiences that afternoon slump, for example, or that brain fog, like how could you improve your metabolic health, and what difference would it be if you didn't have those things that you're experiencing day to day? And just to break that down even further, maybe is this something that we can all just note down quickly or think about, is just one change we can commit to tomorrow. It doesn't need to be big, it can be really small. So just that one thing we can do to get to a place where we are in that well-being, metabolically friendly place. So this is an article you may have come across before. It was released a while ago now, but this was a great article by the journalist Fiona Duncan, who came to stay with us at Combe Grove, and she actually reversed her high blood pressure and her blood glucose levels in the space of about 6 to 8 weeks, I think it was. It was quite quickly. So she was quite surprised at the impact metabolic health can have, how she felt afterwards, and how quickly those changes were in the body. And just to go over our programs really quickly before we get through to the questions, because I can see they have been coming in whilst I've been talking. Our metabolic health programs, these are the ones we have coming up. So the next one, sorry, is on the 31st of March, which is our 5-night stay. Then we've got the 14th of April, and we've got about one running a month. So you can have a look on our website. I've put a link there, but you can find it quite easily if you just go onto the Metabolic Health Retreat section, and you can see all of the dates that we have upcoming. So you can find one hopefully that works for you if any of this has resonated with you and you really want to, make those changes and be that person that's not experiencing those things. And as you've been also kind to attend this webinar and spend this hour with me, there is a £250 discount available if it's made within about 48 hours of this webinar. So if it's early next week, we can be flexible with that, but the sooner the better, because then you secure your place. So you might be saying, sort of, what does it look like, the metabolic health program? Again, I won't spend too long on it because you can find the information on our website, but essentially it's a 5-night stay where you live and breathe those 5 roots for metabolic health. So you have dedicated workshops on all of them. We talk you through how to make those changes, how to incorporate those 5 roots into your life. And then you also get, obviously, all your meals provided for. You get to stay on site. You get 2 treatments included along with your nutrition 1-to-1 package. And something that we've recently incorporated is that we have actually included a returner stay in the package. So not only do you get that 5-night initial stay, we also welcome you back in about 12 weeks' time, where we'll do a full health check and we'll look at all those blood markers, all those body composition markers that I was been talking about in this webinar, and along with your treatments and your nutrition consultation, just to see how you've got on and just to deep dive into sort of those challenges or any obstacles that you've experienced, as well as obviously looking at our 5 roots again. So that second one is a 3-night stay, 4 days, and that is included in the price. We also have Combe Grove at home. So this is great for those who potentially would struggle to come and take that time out of their diary. And essentially it's just bringing Combe Grove to you. So instead of coming to stay with us and going to your workshops, we are delivering bi-weekly webinars, going through those 5 roots, going through all that same information to really, really change those key 9 markers. It comes with your dedicated health coach or metabolic health coach, so registered dietitian or nutritionist, doing your 1-to-1s throughout those 12 weeks. And it's the same thing in terms of we're looking at your full sort of health check at the start and then your full health check at the end of those 12 weeks. So you can really see kind of what's worked, what's not worked, and we can help you going forward on how to make those changes. So the date on the screen is obviously incorrect. That's obviously in the past, but we had our second cohort start last week, and we've got another cohort coming up, which again you can find the dates for on our website. And if you are looking to do that at home version, there's also a discount code available for you. So £125 if booked within 48 hours of this webinar. Okay, so I think that's enough from me. If you did want to email me, ask me any questions after this webinar, it is lovely to hear from you and I can assist in any way. I've got some time tomorrow to look through anything. So my email is emma.patch@coombegrove.com. So please do get in touch. And then we can go through your questions. I believe we've got some time, about 13 minutes.
Hi, Emma. So, some of the questions that we've got, I'll start from the bottom. Do you do blood work when you start the retreat?
Yes, yeah, sorry, I probably didn't say that soon enough. We do. We look at your HbA1c, so that average of blood glucose over the last 3 months, and we look at your specific triglycerides and HDL markers, so those cholesterol markers that I was talking about, which show a significant link to metabolic health and how well things are operating. And then we also look at your body composition. So we have a very clever machine called the QNIC, which sends a very small bioelectrical current through the body. And it essentially knows by the resistance what it's going through. So it gives a comprehensive analysis of fat mass, muscle mass, visceral fat, and water ratio. So we know then all together with your blood pressure and with your waist circumference what is happening in your body and where you are currently in your metabolic health journey, and then we can use that to tailor it to make your goals going forward. So your designated nutritionist and dietitian can use that to tailor your goals, and track your progress going forward. So when you come back to us in 12 weeks time, we'll do all the same again, and hopefully you would have been able to see that improvement.
The next question is, what would be an optimal level of A1C and fasting insulin, and at which level is it wise to take steps?
Yeah, so it depends on sort of where I'm guessing you're using UK measures. Ideally, you want your HbA1c to be sort of, I would say, maximum late 30s, early 40s. Technically, you don't get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes until it's about 48, I believe. And the pre-diabetic range is at 43, 44 to 48. So you want it to be below that. But I would say ideally, if we're looking at optimal, sort of low 30s, ideally. And then fasting insulin below 5.5. Sorry, that's blood glucose. Fasting blood glucose below 5.5. We actually don't test fasting insulin. It's something that is becoming slightly more common, so it's definitely something we want to do going forward. But the next best thing to the insulin is the blood glucose, so that's what we're looking at with your HbA1c.
The next question is, could you recommend pulses that are not so high in carbohydrates?
Yeah, so really good question. I would say with pulses, because they carry some protein as well, try to go for the ones slightly higher in protein. And it's all about how much you have. So there's nothing wrong with having some pulses and some beans. So for example, I often use butter bean mash instead of mashed potato, and I just have half a can. So it's not a big amount. But if you say, for example, made a lentil bolognese, you probably would be having quite a bit in there. So even though it carried that protein element, it also is carrying a bit more carbohydrates because of the quantity. So I would actually say try to focus on ones higher in protein. So pew lentils tend to be particularly high, edamame beans tend to be particularly high. But just focus on the amount instead of cutting them out.
The next question is, if low on ferritin due to perimenopause, which foods could help, and could you recommend a specific form of iron that is not harsh on the stomach yet is effective?
Specific form of iron. So, what are you? It'd be interesting to know sort of what you're having already. If we're looking at, the highest of sources of iron in our diet, they do tend to be sort of red meat. You could get it from leafy greens as well, but with leafy greens, you tend to have quite a lot. So yeah, red meat actually tends to be the highest with that one. In terms of kind of specifics, I would probably need to know a little bit more about you, to be completely honest, and it would have to be a bit more of a consultation. But that's just kind of giving you a little bit of guidance as a starting point.
The next question is, I struggle with breakfast ideas as I cannot eat eggs or nuts and seeds. Would Greek yogurt be enough as a protein source?
Yeah, really good question. So you can always focus on fish, for example. So things like mackerel is quite a nice one, with maybe a bit of a creme fraiche dressing, or smoked salmon. You absolutely can use Greek yogurt. It does carry a bit of protein. It's a mixture of protein, fat, and carbohydrate. Um, I would just say, just be aware that it probably won't keep you going for a long period of time. So if you're having the Greek yogurt as your breakfast and you're expecting to keep it going for about 4 hours, you might struggle with that. So as long as you're doing that extra top up, maybe in about 2 hours time, with maybe some meat or some fish or some tofu or tempeh, just to increase that protein, that overall protein amount, that's absolutely fine. You should be okay with that.
We had the question about how much protein should we aim for per day?
Mm. Yeah, really good question. So we say about 1.5 times your ideal body weight. So if my ideal body weight, let's say about 65 kilos, then I would be aiming for around, 90 to 100 grams a day, which sounds a lot, but actually when you incorporate multiple protein sources and you pair, primary protein sources such as meat or fish or tofu and tempeh with a little bit of beans and pulses, it actually adds up pretty quickly. And if you're having protein in your snacks as well, so that could be a bit of dairy, such as Greek yogurt, it could be a little bit of cheese, could be some nuts and seeds, then it gets to that point pretty quickly. So, for a chicken breast, that can be anywhere between sort of like 30 grams, 40 grams, depending on how big the chicken breast is. A salmon fillet, maybe high 20s, early 30s in terms of grams of protein. And if you pair that with some butter beans, that's maybe an extra 10 grams. So you can see how quickly it can build throughout the day. So yeah, just ask yourself, how many protein sources am I having in my meal and how much am I having, to try and get to increasing that little bit.
The next question is, are there any specific probiotic foods that could lower A1C?
Yeah, really good question. Um, In terms of kind of specific probiotic foods, not that I'm aware of in terms of research, but looking after your gut absolutely can help with inflammation, which obviously can then lower your blood glucose levels. So just incorporating multiple sources in terms of like trying to have fermented foods, for example, so that could be things like dairy kefir, so mixing that with a little bit of Greek yogurt, having anything that's like pickled, for example, or having things like your kimchi or your sauerkraut, which has been fermented, all can help increase that gut-friendly bacteria, which can reduce inflammation in the body. So I would just say try to have a range, because that tends to what works quite well for our gut as well. It doesn't thrive off of, one particular thing. It's a range of different things.
The next question is, can I ask your thoughts on protein powders in water and or added to yogurt?
Yeah, so with protein powders, I would just say be careful about all the additives that can be in there and sweeteners. So there's quite a good one, I think it's called just organic protein powders off the top of my head, and it is just natural ingredients. So if you are really struggling to get in your proteins, if you're someone maybe that, doesn't eat a lot of meat, or you don't like meat and fish, then it might be useful to incorporate. But I will say, where possible, is trying to stick to those real natural foods, just because that tends to be what our body responds best to and what fills us up for the longest. So you can put it in water. It might taste not as nice, but you can also mix it in with yogurt, so it just makes it nice and thick, essentially. Or you could put it into a smoothie with yogurt, and then a small amount of berries. You could incorporate it that way too.
The next question is it helpful to limit red meat consumption if struggling with metabolic health and inflammation?
Yeah, so the evidence on red meat and sort of metabolic health, overall being, it is mixed in terms of if you Googled it, but actually when you look at the sort of scientific data, it's not that strong in terms of its relation to things like, type 2 diabetes and heart disease, because our consumption of red meat has actually gone down quite a bit in the last sort of few years because unfortunately it's been demonized quite heavily in the media. But these instances of type 2 diabetes and heart disease have not gone down. So, using a logical conclusion from that, one doesn't cause the other. So it's not an issue, but it's also thinking about including multiple food sources. So do you want to have red meat every single day? No, just because you would also want to incorporate some oily fish or some different protein sources that provide your body with different vitamins, minerals, and nutrients. So it's just thinking about it maybe a bit more sort of rationally on, yes, it's fine to include, but you also want to include multiple protein sources to get, the maximum benefits for your body.
I think we've got time for one more question.
Yeah, that's fine.
How do you work out the grams of protein in a food?
So all product labels in the supermarket will have to have the grams of protein. So always go for 100 grams. So it will always say per 100 grams and per serving. Always look at per 100 grams just because the serving size differs quite heavily depending on the product and depending on how they're trying to market that product. So if you think about breakfast cereals, for example, they often put the serving sizes really, really low, so the nutrition elements look better. So always go per 100 grams, because then when you're comparing two products, it's a fair comparison because it's the same amount. But yeah, that's how you find out how many grams of protein are in certain foods. You can also, Google now has like an AI function where you can just ask it really simple questions like that. So how much protein is in 140 gram or 160 gram chicken breast? And usually it's pretty accurate in terms of what is generating. So you could also try that if you do want to keep a tab on it going forward, or you're just interested to see what your amounts are. But just to add on that, sorry, Katie, another key thing is about a palm size. So we've got 1 to 2 palm sizes of protein per meal, depending on what else you're having. So if you're having, multiple sources, if you're having maybe like a cream sauce, then maybe you would just need 1 palm size. But if you're just having it with non-starchy vegetables, then maybe you would need 2 palm sizes. So yeah, that's also sort of a little tip for you to work out how much to have.
I think we just do one more question,
Yeah.
Emma. Any supplements you recommend?
Yeah, really good question, actually. So in the UK at the moment, obviously, we're not getting a lot of sunlight, unfortunately. So I would highly recommend vitamin D. And that is something that's quite, universal and what the government recommends. So depending on your age, it can be from about 10 UG to about 25 to 50 UG. I would also recommend looking at taking magnesium. And that's just because magnesium is really, really useful in the body in terms of our energy systems, in terms of helping sleep as well. And unfortunately, our soil is quite depleted. So we don't actually get the same amounts from food that maybe we used to. So I'd also look at taking some magnesium. But in terms of kind of any specific supplements for you, obviously I would need to look at your diet in a bit more detail to recommend further than that.
I think that's all the questions for now, Emma.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. Like I said, if we didn't manage to get around to your question, if there is anything that you want to know about the program, or you would like just a quick call tomorrow to go through anything, just give me an email. So it's emma.patch@coomgrove.com, and I'll be able to help going forward. But thank you so much. And like I said, we will send out the recording to this. And hopefully we will see you soon and be able to help you with your health goals. Thanks so much, everyone.